All right, how you doing? You're listening to NYC Radio Live. David Ellenbogen here. Great to be with you. This is a different kind of show. Usually we concentrate on music. Today it's more dance, but you know, dance is just music in motion. And more than that too, of course. And I met Misa Kelly, who is performing at the Collaborations in Dance Festival, which is still going on at Triskelion Arts. I strongly recommend it. You can go to triskelion.org, I believe, and you can go to artbark.org to learn more about Misa Kelly. Really fascinating story. She brings alive. Well, you'll hear. She brings alive the story of her incredibly talented sister in a journey through dance, and she's got quite a story herself. So here we are hanging out at the apartment, Misa Kelly and myself. Enjoy. I was at the Collaborations in Dance Festival at Triskelion Arts, which is still going on next weekend. So I wasn't planning to come there, but I thought, they said, oh, it's dance and knitting. Like, that's what they described it to me. They're like, oh, it's a dance and knitting event. I was like, okay, that's good, because it's something different. And then, that was a really moving piece. I don't know if you got to see that one. There was one about dance and knitting.
I danced in that one.
You were in that as well?
Yeah.
Okay. I was curious if that was the same person. So that was very moving. And when you're saying, why do we do this? I was having kind of all these revelations about the lack of utility in a kind of capitalistic sense. Mm-hmm. is almost the joy. Like the fact that you have to say, why are we doing this?
It's almost the antithesis of it.
Yeah.
And I think that it is the balancing factor in a planet that is very much out of balance.
Mm. So it's like everybody is trying to make their widgets, and this, or even trying, like, it's always about making a buck, and this is like the worst idea of how to make a buck.
Exactly, and when you think about capitalism, it's how to make a buck, but within the model, a sense of spirituality or spirit or heart or values and ethics aren't a part of the dynamic of capitalism. But for the artist and for the maker, that may be the very heart of the work that they do. It's very much a spiritual practice for myself, and I know for other artists as well. And I think that's why we have the willingness to make such great sacrifices to continue on with our creative practice.
Right. And I once was present for the interview for one of the original beats, and he was saying that there's certain directions one could go in life, and that you have family that might tell you not to go down these paths, and they might love you and they might be right, and he said, but still hang out with other people. So I imagine that when you're doing something like this, where you're pushing the boundaries of art and expression, that having a community is really vital to making that kind of happen.
I think so, absolutely. It's such an esoteric field that for the boutique artists, usually it's the family and friends that support them. If you're a major label, then you have the hype of the press and big marketing and name brand and recognition, and then you can have audience draw. But for the lesser known artists that exist in the eaves, it's not the same case. But what I found really fascinating before I came out here, there was a West Coast celebration with all of sort of like the big name choreographers in New York, and I really enjoyed myself. But in addition to performing, I'm able to see the works, and I had this moment of revelation, thinking I'm so grateful that the road less traveled by chose me and to exist in the eaves of dance, because I found the work had a little bit more bite to it, and for me as a maker, creative and spiritual and soulful growth is really important, and being in a container around other artists that are also seeking and questing and pushing boundaries is really important for growth. And I think once you become well established as a company, then your funders and patrons, they may expect the similar thing, and maybe there's not as much creative growth.
Right. And it happens very slowly and like without your own realizing it, I think,
Yeah.
Because you start, making little choices.
Yeah. And in a broader brushstroke, it's a lot about, we talk about the 99%, the artists that exist in the eaves is the bulk of the dance community.
Mm-hmm. So, and then I guess I'll talk about my subjective experience for your piece, because it might be interesting to you. So, your piece began, and we're watching this video, and it's very compelling because it's you can tell that this is a person being interviewed who has some kind of mental issues of some sort, and we're totally surrounded by people like that in New York City, but it's very rare that you get to hear them in the dignity of an interview. And then that was interesting, and then suddenly we see the art of this person, and you realize, oh, this is a profound person. This is a very high level artist, and that's a very powerful moment as an audience, and I learned afterwards that this person is your sister, and as seems that what you're expressing is telling her story of the challenges of even being allowed to make her art within the mental health system.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. And the whole journey, there was a period of time where I didn't know where she was homeless for 10 years. And I think the important thing to articulate, especially when you see someone on the streets, my sister, in essence, was the person who collects recycling. And for her, it was a sense of purpose and a connection to the environment. And she collected recycling. She didn't make much, but she wanted to contribute to the planet.
Wow.
And even though she couldn't function to hold a job, that was her way of supporting the community.
Wow, that alone.
And so now when I know there's people in my community who collect recycling, you just have a greater degree of empathy, and also realizing the people who are on the streets. I think my sister made that choice because some of these facilities, these lockdown psychiatric units, they're hellacious. There's horrible things going on inside. And I just was really struck by her desire to, one, get out of the situation she was in. And when someone is in a horrible setting, it builds on the PTSD that they already have, and they can't function. They don't have the capacity to advocate for themselves. And what's really interesting about the mental health system in Los Angeles County, there are no checks and balances between the integrated system. For instance, with elder care, they have something called a long-term care ombudsman who is independent and visits the facilities to make sure that everything is okay. But there is nobody that visits inside these facilities, and oftentimes family members don't come. I remember visiting my sister once, and I talked to one woman. She says, I come and see my brother once every 3 months for 10 minutes. In the interim, we know that there are people on the planet that are sadistic, and it's a part of the human condition to have these fabrics of people who have their own I would say, spiritual illness and soul illness, that they derive pleasure in inflicting pain on vulnerable people. And so it's a perfect opportunity for them to carry out their poor behavior when you don't have somebody checking in on these people, these vulnerable people.
Right.
And I had over 600 hours in calling into her, and to just hear, the screaming and the yelling. And I remember
the screaming and yelling in the background.
In the background. And then she's saying, oh, so-and-so is eating out of the trash can, and fights breaking out. And, oh, it's these two guys are fighting over sex with my roommate.
Wow.
Or being on the phone and hearing her, go away, and asking her what's happening. And she'd say, so-and-so is trying to kiss me. And then also being in the room, having a roommate, having to witness your roommate have sex.
Right.
It's just crazy. Or being stuck in a room. She has eating issues, which is often goes hand in hand with deep trauma, body image issues and eating issues. Being left in a room, in a dark room, with cold cafeteria food, and being forced to stay there until she eats. And this is like 2018.
Actually, my parents used to do that.
Sit at the table before you eat.
Yeah, they wouldn't let me leave the table till I ate everything.
Yeah.
But
So it was interesting to me that she not only wanted to spiral out of the situation, but she wanted her art to be a voice.
Right. And that that was one of the kind of remarkable things, was that, I guess radio is not the perfect format for what a great artist she is, but it's pretty profound stuff. It recalls Picasso and this kind of thing, very dramatic and powerful and pithy. And you were saying that she was never allowed to do more than half an hour of art a day, or
it's varied situation to situation. When she was homeless, she just didn't have the resources.
Sure.
And she was a professionally trained artist, and when she was an award-winning artist all through school. Junior high she won awards, high school she won awards. She got a small scholarship to go to Otis Art Institute, and they all thought that she would be the next Pablo Picasso. So phenomenally gifted, and if she hadn't, I think, been exposed to the trauma that she was in our formative years, she might have achieved that. Uh-huh. And I think for the spiraling up journey, the healing journey, in my own process, I think harnessing someone to a sense of their life work and passion is the greatest healing. Not so much art for therapy, but life work. And when I first came back into her life, I hadn't really been a part of her life for 40 years, because the healers I was working with said that it's best to not have any contact with your family. And the concept of putting your own oxygen mask on first. And about 8 years I attempted to reach out and be a resource to her, because she was asking for support, she was asking for help. And I tried, and I became really destabilized. And my doctor at the time said, you can't do this right now. And I had an experience in 2015 where I came close to death. I was really, really sick and had a brain aneurysm repair. And when I got my health back, I was asking the universe, why am I still here? Why? I felt like I had a second breath in life. And something spoke to my heart and said, it's an opportunity to help your sister. And at this time, I had achieved everything that I wanted to on the road less traveled by as a multidisciplinary artist. And I thought, okay, now is the time. I'm going to begin. And my therapist thought I was done with therapy, and we were wrapping it up after a 25-year process. I worked with, I think, about 10 or 15 therapists. I re-entered her life and discovered she was in a really horrible, horrible situation. And she asked for help. She was saying things are going on inside this facility that are keeping me stuck. The people, being around so many sick people, it's contagious. I'm getting sicker. So we began the long, arduous journey of advocacy and trying to shut down the the poor behaviors inside the facility, and began to take her to art classes, and she began to come back to life. I didn't think initially at first that it was possible. The first outing that I had with her, it was almost she was playful, but she also had these robotic moments where I would say something and she would repeat it back. And then because I've learned so much about trauma recovery, and I wasn't aware at the time, there's something called peer support, and the concept of peer support is someone who has been in the pit and has crawled their way out. They know how to get out, so they jump back in to help somebody else out. So I just organically began to work with her in a process that I've developed as an artist called Joy Blossom Yoga, which is about being present with the person in the moment, and then following your heart and your intuition with regard to what is most beneficial. And I realized the first thing for her is she needed to become aware of her, self-aware. She had no self-awareness. And like, for instance, she wasn't aware when she was triggered, is a word that you use in PTSD. So we began with simple grounding techniques to get her grounded, and I began to teach her some mindfulness techniques and emotional freedom techniques and the power of journaling, and of course plugging her back into her life work, because she, like me, in order to survive the deep trauma, developed a subdivided psyche that used to be called a multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder. And well, for myself and my recovery path, my front personality was always pretty high functioning. She's really more fragmented, and it seems like the disability is much more severe, and her strongest part is her artist self and her student self, but that part was buried by all of the rest of this. So getting her plugged back into her art was really pivotal in her coming back into her body, I think.
Right. And how's she doing now?
She had a recent psychotic episode. We had to go through this horrible journey when we weren't able to resolve some of the problems internally. My sister said, please report the doctor, report these people outside of the facility. I can't do this. And so I began knocking and calling every door. And there was Nanette, I can't remember her, a politician in Southern California. I had sent a letter to the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, but they didn't do anything. And she initiated an investigation. And when the investigations started, things got better. Some of the abuse stopped, and I also noticed it was interesting. I all of a sudden wasn't hearing any more of this groaning and screaming, and my sister reflected back and said, yeah, it has gotten better since the investigation. But then they did what most people do who are, I guess in essence, we were whistleblowers, who experienced retaliation. And they all gave a doctor's order that I not be able to see her. And the corporation sent 2 letters to the public guardian's office and asked that the conservatorship for her be taken away and a public guardian assigned. And my niece is the conservator. And this all was enormously stressful for my sister. And every person that we talked to, they kept saying, you need legal support, you need legal counsel, but we didn't have the funding for legal counsel. So I coached my sister, and I told her what was going on. I said, people are telling me we need legal counsel, but we can't really afford it. You should ask the judge, because you have a right to legal representation. So when she went to the first court meeting, she did. She had the courage. She said, I would like legal support for help getting out of this facility. So an attorney was assigned to assist the conservator to get out. So at the hearing against the allegations with the corporation, the judge cited on behalf of the family, and it felt like we were given this gift with the chaos we have in our nation right now. It to me was such a beacon of hope that in essence, to have this corporation that was trying to take the conservatorship away from family, they lost. It felt like a David and Goliath sort of situation. So he then we were trying to get her moved, and they didn't want to move her, and then so the judge then gave a court order for release of her records, and they still wouldn't move her, and they began to make up new stories about what was going on, and they began to say, well, she's not eating and she's losing weight, but I could see clearly that she was gaining weight. And the public defender went to pick up the records when they wouldn't release the records, and they said there were some really wonky things in the records that showed that the corporation was lying by holding her there. And they put her in a skilled nursing facility with no mental health care, and she had been 8 months smoke-free and was sent to a facility that gives away free cigarettes to the clients. And they put her in a room with 2 roommates, and it's like a hospital room with curtains in between, and the 2 roommates there were 2 televisions, and they were on 24/7. And at first I didn't believe it until I get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you'd hear the televisions blaring. And anybody who doesn't sleep for a month, it's sleep deprivation. You're going to have a psychotic episode. But the beauty of it, this time, in the past when she has been triggered, she has run away from facilities and has disappeared for 3 to 6 months and has no recollection of what she's done. But this time, she stayed present with the process. She even asked for more medication. She asked to be hospitalized. So she had to be shipped off to be stabilized, and she's back in the same facility. And though it's not ideal, the facility has a different perspective on the value of the arts. At the previous facility, the woman that was her advocate was someone who was a religious extremist. One of the things that they wrote about why they wanted the conservatorship taken away was because our relationship was inappropriate, and our relationship was an art relationship. And I think they didn't like me taking her to life drawing classes. And the facility we're in right now...
Because there was nudity.
Because there's nudity. I mean, how crazy is that? This is a woman who is professionally trained, and her passion is painting live from the model. That's her calling. That's her life work. But because it conflicts with the advocate's idea of what's appropriate, then they have the right and the power to shut it down. But the new facility, they've been great. They approved me right away to take her on outings. The social worker said it'll be great therapy. They also approved for me to take her on a family overnight. And for the first time in 3 years, she slept away from a facility and with a big bed and a pool. And we went for a pedicure and just had the time of her life. So even though it's not ideal, I think that it's better than it was. And also because she's in a skilled nursing facility, the long-term care ombudsman has jurisdiction. And when I called them about the sleep situation, because the facility said the patients have a right to have the TVs on, and I asked, well, doesn't she have a right to quiet time? And the long-term care ombudsman agreed with that she has a right to quiet time and just as much time. So she wants them to come advocate for her, so she's going to do that. So she's doing better, but it's going to be a long journey.
Well, I know a few people who have had some interactions with the mental health facilities in New York City, and one was just actually a straight whistleblowing situation, retribution for whistleblowing, and it was very difficult to get out. And it was almost, from his description, it was an extension of the kind of executive law enforcement, party, like and
it feels militarized inside. Yeah, for me at least, my personal experience.
And it's interesting. So it's just to hear that you took. And I'm just thinking of other things I've seen just with bureaucratic systems. I taught in the Bronx for a while, and the thing the teacher said was that schools change teachers more than teachers change schools. And it's like when you have a big kind of collective of people, that the culture of the machine can be so much stronger than an individual trying to change it, and often it just changes the individual. rather
Yeah.
than so it is absolutely miraculous that you guys had success.
And I think a part of it is the nature of the project that we're doing. I must have contacted 10, 15 different organizations, the governor's office, the American Medical Association, CARF International, which oversees them. And when I talked to one attorney in an nonprofit advocacy for the mental health, and when I told her what was going on and what I was attempting to accomplish, she had basically told me to give up and it's impossible. And I thought, why in the hell are you even doing the work that you're doing? And something spoke to my gut and spoke to my heart to put her in the safest place I know. And the safest place would be in a creative project. So we launched this project called the Van Gogh Project. And I set as the intention that this work of art would be getting her out of the facility into her life work, would be the project itself, with realization of her ultimate goal being the end of the project. And her wish is to one day have her own apartment and her own studio. Because she worked before, and I believe she has that capacity in her. And in the project, I also sent the intention to have it be kind of like a experimental social change, where I would send art into every facet that I interfaced with. Because when someone is conserved, it's a really complex web. So in essence, the art project became emails to Mother Jones, tips to the New York Times, tips to the Los Angeles Times. It became being present, and because we were talking about art in the creative process, it became integrated into the political system. It went into the courts. For instance, I wasn't aware of someone under an LPS conservatorship that can't enter contracts. And when the attorney that was assigned discovered that I had arranged some exhibitions for my sister, she said, well, you have to be really careful. It could be construed that you're taking advantage of your sibling. So art went to court for the second art show. I described what the venue was and sent pictures of her art. So in essence, her artwork and my artwork and a description of this community went before a judge, and the judge voted, in essence, or whatever they do. He decided to favor on behalf of the artist. And I think sending creative energy and the light of awareness into these dark recesses, because I think the fabric of our society wants to recover, wants to heal. I think that energy has helped us along the way.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of brings the conversation a little bit full circle, because we're talking about the total impracticality almost being the point. Mm-hmm. And yet this was the key to unlocking all these really tightly wound mechanisms, right? I mean, it was like
and I think because there's so many impossible scenarios in the world around us today, and the important thing to do is to look to the leaders who've walked before us and have managed great feats, and to learn from them, but also realize that we need fresh approaches for today. So, like, for instance, Martin Luther King was really pivotal in growing up, and there was a point in this process, the creative process, where I had what is called an act of creative disobedience. And when the investigators were investigating, the corporation was just presenting lies about the family. And I sent them something that was a part of my creative research and also a part of my sister and I's Van Gogh project. We had something called a reality radio series where we would use Van Gogh's quote, to do good work, one must be well housed, have good food, and be able to drink your coffee in peace. And
that was a quote from
from Van Gogh. So we would use that as a context, and I would ask her, well, are you well housed? And she would talk about the housing. Right. So I sent them this to show them, one, that the corporation has the capacity to lie, and two, the nature of the relationship. It's a beautiful project. And somebody within the investigative branch sent that link to the corporation, who in turn sent it to their medical malpractice attorneys, who drafted a cease and desist letter demanding that I, in essence, destroy our art, and threatened me with a $5,000 fine and a year in jail. And I think the important lesson, and I even stated when I sent it to him, I said, this is an act of civil disobedience. And when it was just so beyond belief that people who are hired and paid by the government, government funded to protect the rights of the vulnerable, the lead investigator didn't even know the law. I had to quote to him from the Lanterman Petrus Short Act how what the corporation was doing was in violation of the law, but they sent it to the corporation, who then sent it to the attorneys. So in essence, they were sending a harmful letter to the very client that you were serving. And another sort of figure that was, or a quote that came to me, was Nelson Mandela. It always seems impossible until you're done. And truly, the situation seemed impossible, but when you're presented with something impossible, when you're gifted with that, the universe gives you the resources you need. And for myself, I have some Hawaiian ancestry, and I think there's some healers in the lineage they call kahunas. I've always identified as a cultural shaman, and I began to cope. I began to do some shamanic journeying and began to work on that level. And I also had the metaphor. My brother was a falconer and passed during this time. Falcons would always show up, and so whenever I was in a thick moment, I would just imagine the falcon in the sky. They have the birds coming at them, but the falcon stays the course with their heart, staying course.
Interesting. What was the method of the shamanic work that you were doing?
I'm trying to remember. It's shamanic journeying. They play drums, and then they lead you on guided meditation. So you learn your spirit guides and your animal guides, and I'd spend time in nature, feeling one with the land. So if my sister was in a bad space or a situation came up, I would use that energy and that meditation and intention, and from a place of unconditional love, would send it into the situation.
Wow.
And calling on ancestors for support as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. And before this, you said that before you had that medical situation, you've accomplished a lot of what you wanted to accomplish in the arts.
Yeah, which was intriguing for me because I came to the arts late in life. I was 28, and I was going through ceremonies with highest honors and thought I was going to go get a PhD in Stanford, and something spoke to my heart and said, "You're not done yet." And I realized I had always wanted to dance, and I had one class left, and I went to the College of Letters.
You're going to get a PhD in what?
In economics.
Oh, okay.
Somebody wrote on my behalf and said, "This woman's really bright. You should give her some funding." They sent me a letter and said, "We've got funding. We heard you're really smart. We would love to have you in our program." And so I dropped it, and I pursued dance. And I think it was actually the dance that unlocked the trauma. Because trauma is held in the body. There's a new book out by Bessel van Kolk, and he talks about the body keeps the score. And when you dance, it's a lot about bringing your body into functional alignment. So if you have memory is stored in the body and you release the tension, then the stories come tumbling out. And then also it became a wonderful healing resource for myself to shamanically and culturally shift that energy by taking the deepest, darkest shadow energy imaginable and transforming it into a thing of beauty and catharsis and inspiration that not only brought wellness to my soul, but to witnesses to the project as well.
And where does that dark energy, does it go somewhere? Is it somehow shifted, like what?
It goes into the art itself, and so I see the drawings that I have. I see them as my medicine in a way. It's a way of overcoming whatever the challenges that I agreed to or just happened by hard luck to come into. There's something called the Me Too movement that I'm sure you're aware of. I think there's something that I would call sub-Me Too that we're aware of, but we haven't even begun to acknowledge. Like, we know of something called the dark web, and we know on this place called the dark web that there's parents who talk about how they abuse their children and the children enjoy it. And sometimes it's not just the family. It's, in our case, it was an integrated system. So, my parents, my sister and I were both sex trafficked in essence, and we were sold to different communities. And I don't want to go into the depths of the trauma and also medical experimentation, but it was horrific stuff. I mean, torture is not fun. I mean, the flip side of torture is that in order to survive, you create, the human body is so resilient. You use your creativity by creating different aspects of your psyche and walling it off, and the altered states of consciousness that it induces. But to recover is it's a lot easier now than when I was doing it in the 90s. In the 90s, they knew very little about trauma. So when you had your flashback, you would fully relive the event. If you were anally raped, you'd feel the horrible searing pain of anally raped. If you were shocked with electricity, your body would remember with the electric sort of jolts. And so you would relive the experience. But now there are so many wonderful healing modalities like EMDR and somatic experiencing. And what somatic experiencing does is you ground into the present moment and into your body, and you let that be 90%, and you always stay present, and then 10% is the flashback of what you're experiencing. And there's creative ways of dealing with it. For instance, one author by the name of Allison Miller, if you have a dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder, other survivors have discovered that it's really helpful to set the intention to move these different aspects to different parts of your consciousness, and I found that very, very helpful.
So if someone's having some kind of traumatic flashback, with a somatic thing, they're recommending you take the experience and put it 90% in your body, or identify it.
No, what you do is, like, for instance, if something is coming up, my therapist would ask you to go to the place in your body that feels most comfortable. And sometimes you can't find a place of comfort, and you feel really numb. You're completely out of your body. So it's always an option. You can stroke your hair, and you put all of your attention onto your hair, and then the body re-regulates itself, because what stuck trauma is, it's just energy that needs to be released, and then you ask your body to do what it wants to do to release the energy. So, but not so much that it activates the system where you become even more agitated, but little bits. So, for instance, with my sister on the phone, when she was triggered and having a flashback, I'd say, hold a little rattle and shake your fists. And then back to the breath and the body. And then also what was really helpful, like when I asked my sister this time around what was most helpful for her, she said the work of Thich Nhat Hanh, and Thich Nhat Hanh teaches mindfulness, and I had given her one meditation that was really helpful for me, where he in the meditation, it's about the present moment, beautiful moment, lovely moment, and to know the present moment so you don't get lost in dream. So before she wasn't able to discern what was a hallucination and what was reality, but this time around she was able to discern what is real and what's a hallucination. Like, one of her hallucinations were aliens, and I know this is going to sound a little bit wonky, but part of what we were exposed to is people, in my experience, would dress up. We would be given given drugs to induce an altered state of consciousness, and then people would dress up like aliens, and then it takes a while to figure out that wasn't true. It was created, but it feels real because that's what you were deceived into believing. And in Allison Miller's work, she talks about how to seek for the part of the self that floats outside the body, that's an observer. And I had one aspect of my psyche later in my process that would comment and show me the trickery of how they sort of faked what's going on and what felt real at the time. And then when she again had the aliens came up when she was in one hospital being transferred to another. We used our art skills, and I said, she talks about the Van Gogh colors being purple, blue, orange, and yellow. And I said, well, can you take and she knows. I said,
Lavender.
And lavender, yeah. And I said, can you put Van Gogh color wigs on the aliens? And she said, see that happening? And she said, I can see that. And I said, now, we know they're just really parts of you. Can you imagine a beautiful beam of light and just put those aliens in the beam of light? And she says, okay, I can do that. And I said, now can you step in with them into the light? And she did that. And then further on in the day, I asked her, how are the aliens? She says, we're trying to get out again. And I said, well, and then we did some more visualization around it. And I'll be really interested the next time if she does have another episode of psychosis, if this may have resolved the psychosis issues or not. Because what I found really fascinating is, when it wasn't until I recovered the memory that I began to understand some of her delusions. They were actually metaphors for the trauma that we were endured. Some of it's so horrific that I think we create things like a metaphor or something or poetry to separate ourselves from it because it's just so horrific to look at.
Wow. And what's the EMDR? What's that?
EMDR, and it's great because you can look at it on YouTube. There's one that I really like, I think, by Jerry Bassick, and it's just like a basic eye sort of movement. So I have like a playlist that I play if I'm triggered. I watch the EMDR first. I might do some EFT, tapping, emotional freedom technique. There's another good thing called Reboot the Brain. I found shamanic drumming or Native American Indian drumming in particular was really helpful because in a way it's an energetic and also feels like a spiritual component as well. And then also there's certain sort of calming music that can bring the body back to calm.
Wow. I mean, it's unfortunate, but we're going to really need these techniques moving forward. I mean, there's so much going on in the world that it's really important that... And also for people who haven't experienced, traumas of this magnitude, it's all, like, a lot of it's very helpful, anyway, the mindfulness practices and so forth.
And it's great that because it's not a religion, it can get into the school system. A woman that I danced with, her husband got a PhD in meditation and mindfulness, and his thesis was taking it into the schools.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And young kids learning how to breathe and be aware. Because I think in our modern society, it's inherently a toxic, traumatizing experience. Like you see the press, most of the stuff on the news is so negative, it puts you in a state of anxiousness. That cycles into, what people do to self-medicate. It could be as simple as consumption, retail therapy.
Right, retail therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Wow, so a lot to chew on. We are... one last thought. I was thinking how apparently Van Gogh, right? His brother, that they didn't sell any pieces at all, and his brother bought a couple or something, and then he passed away, and they became of great value. Wouldn't it be great if your sisters started cashing in on these things now?
And what's really interesting about her is I have never wanted to sell my art because I have wanted it to be separate, but she really has a desire to sell her work. So the first show we had at this venue on the West Coast called Yoga Soup for Nectar, or the second show we had, we decided to sell it, and she just wants to get it out in the world. So we were selling usually my work if people ask, I'll sell it, and if they see a drawing, from $200 to $800. So drawings and paintings are going really inexpensively. But that's her dream, is to do that.
Yeah.
And I've started an Instagram account called at Spiral Up With Me, and my Instagram is Ginger Freedom. So I've been trying to, I discuss what we post because she doesn't have the capacity to do that right now with her disability. The medications, her hands shake really badly, so she can't, it's hard for her to use her phone. But what's really interesting in closing, I have a short video that's integrated into the dance of her drawing, and you can see the tremor in her hands, and then it just calms down. And I asked her about that, and she says, I just tell my mind, I tell my body, I have to draw. You have to stop shaking. And then the body does, and it just speaks to me of neural plasticity, and I wonder about that in her recovery journey.
Yeah.
And our next goal is she'd love to come to New York City. So I want to design a project. We need her housing situation. She needs to get into a situation that's not a lockdown setting, a more open setting. So we need to accomplish that. And she also wants to go draw in the museums in Paris. And then we want to go paint the landscapes where Van Gogh painted the same landscapes, and then journey to the Van Gogh Museum. So that's kind of our project outline.
Wow. That's so inspiring. And that would be such a lovely... kind of not necessarily endpoint, but a lovely place to take it from this point.
Yeah, and it's a really hopeful story, I think.
Yeah.
To see her and such great heart and courage. I mean, to think of this woman that was 10 years on the street. She even had a child, doesn't know what happened to the child on the streets. And another goal is my brother, when he was passing, from the trauma, he was also profoundly mentally incapacitated, and he kept telling her, I want you to grow your teeth back. I want you to grow your teeth back, because her front teeth are rotted out. And it's just so shocking to me in these facilities how, when we know with gut health, and dental health, there's a direct correlation with dental health. And what I found really fascinating, there were so many parallels in Michel's life and Van Gogh's life. He had teeth rotting out of his mouth as well. And why they don't take care of the dental hygiene, and why they're fed vending machines and junk feeds with sugar that's going to change the gut. And Van Gogh also talked about how being around sick patients made them sicker, and she would comment that she finds them contagious. There are just so many parallels. In many ways, the mental health system hasn't changed, but I think a really amazing model that exists right now that a good friend of mine works with in San Luis Obispo, and I think there's one on the East Coast called Windhorse, and in this philosophy, energetically, they pair somebody up who is mentally broken with somebody who is sound of mind, and they have a huge people in that program. They go back into society working, sound, functional, whole people knowing how to manage their lives. And I would like to see the world work more towards that sort of model, rather than wall off these people, because they're so fascinating, actually. When spending time with my brother and my sister, they have gifts that people walking in everyday life don't, that I would call super abled. They may be what we call disabled in one level, but they're super abled in these other dimensions.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the big early plot twist in your piece.
Yeah.
Is, you might feel sorry for this person at first, and then suddenly you realize, oh, actually, this person's way beyond my level.
Yeah.
In certain ways. Wow. Well, I think it's an amazing thing you're doing, and to the hope of putting a positive and happy twist on the Van Gogh artist archetype and story,
and also the artist response to the intensity with really concrete vision of what would help for change. For instance, not allowing facilities that are locked down to exist unless there is a truly neutral, impartial eyes in the facility monitoring and checking up on the patients,
that's a
what's going
no-brainer.
on. Yeah. And then also a system of checks and balances for corruption within the system itself. Because economically, if you're a large corporation and there's bad shit going down, economically, to save your face, it's easier to pay off the patient's rights office than it is to do the right
And you
thing
probably
and
want to
fix
keep
the
your numbers
problem.
up too. You don't want to lose
Yeah,
patients.
yeah. Would be, I think, be really, really key. I have a lot of other ideas with change, and that's also going to be a part of the project. I've been taking notes, and I want to write the legislative language for legislative change. Use my creative skills for that, and present it to politicians and become an advocate in that sort of way.
It's amazing that you who've had struggled with, with all that you struggled, including like the mental issues, still have the capacity and the will to take on these challenges that would drive anybody off the cliff, even without this rough background.
I did. There was after I re-entered my sister's life, because of the stress of dealing with the corporation was so intense. I did have a period, a complex PTSD flare, and for the first time in my whole life, I've always managed to hold a job, process the trauma, and sometimes I would have to take 2 weeks off if I had a complex PTSD flare, but I had to take 3 months off this time.
All right.
But I'm thinking that it flushed out. It was like whatever final in the sewer. Now I feel really balanced, and I don't get triggered so much. I feel like it fleshed out all the demons that needed to be shaped into earth angels and made into art through this project. It all got dumped into this project. Yeah. And I think that's why this particular work has such powerful energy, powerful medicine. Art for me is medicine, is because of the willingness to be in this fire.
All right. Well, thanks for your work. It's
all
wonderful.
Right. Thank you.
And we've been speaking with Misa Kelly, and she's part of the collaborative Collaborations in Dance Festival, which is still going on and is totally awesome. And I was really pleased to see that it was packed house, and there's a lot of interest in cutting edge collaborative art. So
well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
What a wonderful way to spend a sacred Sunday morning.
Oh yeah, for me as well. All right, thanks.